Hello and welcome, everybody. This is an edited version of my presentation on Metamodern politics from Limicon from Friday, from a couple days ago, posted on my channel. So just wanted to bookend this. There'll be a little outro at the end. Thank you for watching, and please do join me for more. Join the organization, join the Patreon, because it's the only way I can increase any output. And I'd like to do and have way more output. This presentation is a little preview of that, editing it down and adding a little more context. I wish I could do more. This is just the beginning of a project like this being deployed. Enjoy the presentation and stick around. So, what is politics and why should you care? Hopefully, I can show a way out. I want to demystify politics and transform our literacy and praxis around it. And we are going to go beyond the left-right axis, so to speak. So let me start zooming in here. This is the first slide. This is a new stage model that I built, essentially. In terms of levels, you can certainly compare it to other stage models if you want. But, you know, I insist that those models, especially things like the like spiral dynamics or integral or Hanzi and MHC, they're more oriented towards psychological development, right? So what we don't have is an effective map of kind of the epistemic cognitive culture war. And the culture war is the kind of social simulation backbone of the political economy that is also messed up. You know, I consider this map of the epistemic justice gap in the culture war. It's a sociology of knowledge and of political ideology. Beyond that, it's a matrix that we can put lots of things into. As you're going to see, I'm going to show you different versions of this stack and this scale and its applications. So we're going to get into it. The names for these levels can be modified. It's more about the matrix, but they're labeled this way for a point. And I've got this scale system, so everything above 0, and 0 is not the center of politics, by the way. -1 is where the current center is and where it's controlled from, which is why there's so much confusion about where the Overton window is, where the left-right divide is. You know, according to my measurements, and basically all the analysis out there, we are kind of controlled from the right wing of politics. If we come over to this map, if you guys saw this map, this is already sort of common knowledge, but it's a recent report from Media Matters that demonstrates how oversized and overfunded the right wing media sphere is. Basically, they have 9 out of 10 listeners, like almost 10 to 1 for all of their content. But funding wise, it's also quite disproportionate and quite massive. But this should not be news to anybody. What is news is kind of when you take my scale and apply it to the open closed political spectrum, you know, we can start to ostensibly go beyond left and right. Let's say here it's not left versus right, but freedom from ideological capture to epistemic liberation, more transformative politics. Some people might think, oh, Brent's just biased. He's left-wing radical, and he's built a hierarchy that puts all that at the top. And as you'll see here, like what I'm doing politically is showing that those, a lot of formally leftist ideas don't get above level 1 here. They get stuck. They get obstructed. And also on this map, it shows, like on the right side there, what are the traps and the slides that at each level you risk a downward shift. You cite somebody who's far right, or you watch their content and repeat their talking points. You're risking all of this downward shift. And over here is a continuum of upward shift, how at any level you can sort of overcome or break free from different types of propaganda and fallacies. And also, like, just to note, like, although as you see, like, you'll see a lot of this does map to a left-right axis, there will be some, people who identify as left-wingers lower down on the spectrum, right? Case in point, the intellectual dark web, who may rank higher on other metrics, but when we're talking about politics and the culture war, they boast a big game, but they actually don't rank very well. That's why if you watch leftist content, and I know a lot of people are just bored or tired of it or whatever, it's often engaging with their material and debunking it. And I put lists of names of common actors, very big, rich names, and sort of what their title is, what their impact is. So for each level, there's a lot of detail, right? And a lot of familiar names, like Elon Musk. It's pretty obvious why he's way down on level -4. But obviously, as a tech bro, he's engaged in some of this stuff up here. Systemic design, post-capitalist futures. Doesn't mean he's good at it, but he's certainly doing it. I'm agreeing that there's complicated things going on, but this is a big scope diagnostic tool for the stage people, who have been pursuing this kind of thing for a long time, integral politics and whatnot. I don't think they're going to get anywhere. I think it ends up here with an honest clarity of the levels, and also the upper levels, how they have liabilities and blind spots, and how you can be a thinker up here obsessed with this kind of level of discourse and action, but you can be down here. So again, the IDW, right, score low, and that's how this scale is different. It automatically puts people in that context. I have so many different visuals to demonstrate this. See, this is a horizontal one, but some of them are vertical, but they're all showing the same thing. And it's not marked too clearly here, but one of the main themes is like the -1 level here, or around here, right? That's where the political center is. As I was saying, it's right here. It's a dead center. So people get that wrong often. And then over here, there's an opportunity zone. There's a lot of pressure and skepticism and bypassing around radical socialism. And something needs to happen to break that. And something like this here illustrates too, like how I say, it's a growth hierarchy or partnership system over a dominator hierarchy, which is going to dominate in these lower levels of cultural, cognitive intelligence and integrity. The punchline, right, is, it's not left or right, whatever, but we still have to bridge and kind of solidify that leftist political level of policy, that has been suppressed throughout history. So we start here for today anyways. And here's like a Maslow's needs hierarchy, and you can kind of see how that tracks with kind of basic chaos in the middle here. But when things are mapped on a table, we can get a lot more info. This is a timeline. If I was to give a quick history lesson, starting here, the Tea Party, coming off the heels of the financial crisis and the Bush administration, and then we had Occupy Wall Street. What I'm trying to show with this chart is that for every year, there's several major issues that are relevant and clear, and the left has a clear response, and that response is suppressed or deflected. And then there's a bypass pattern, right? So if we stick with the Occupy example, the bypass pattern is after the police crackdowns and media ridicule, we thought, oh, well, the left isn't very good at winning. So disillusionment sets in. bypassing into spirituality, therapy, tech work, right? So proto-fliminal web type of avoidance. And I get it. But my point is the pattern, the left suppression and the excuses that we make. And then there's a lingering impact, right? So we compound the problem ourselves by not having a unified left. And again, it's a paradox. A lot of people don't want to be left. But the only way to break these categories is to truly win with a platform that is outside the normal Overton window, right? So, maybe I'll jump over here. I'm really jumping around. I did have an order to this, but this is about Overton windows and different epistemic groups and strategic zones. Down here in the fascist populist abyss, not a lot we can do to reach those people. I'd say more or less, this is where the current Overton window is. And then here I put slightly shifted up like a normative Overton window. And then up here, an optimal convergence window. And it's just to, at least for mapping purposes, encourage people to think in terms of development past these positive levels. Like there's a reason I based it around 0 and say politics is governing at -1 because it's dog shit. We need to do better. And so part of the historical reason for that, right? 15 years enough. I mean, there's no long enough window. I like to go back to 1930s fascism, 1960s civil rights, and post 9/11 or post Cold War, post 9/11 global politics, because we see this pattern repeating that throughout history, the different actors, and it does track with left, right wing, right? Like Nazis down here are right wing. But again, let's just say we're not even using those categories. We're just using this kind of vertical development, open closed politics, epistemic integrity. Those are the guidelines behind the metrics of gathering this data. And in so much of my outputs here, we see this pattern reestablished where there's this dead center at -1. I call it a sore spot in the strategic zones map. And I call this +1 the sweet spot. I mean, regardless of your politics, it should be obvious to people there's polarization. There's a lot of nothing getting done in the center. We can sort of track it more and more objectively and, hopefully crawl out of this post-truth political atmosphere and media context. I really like the Cold War framing because C. Wright Mills actually called it World War III in the 50s because he had prescience. He knew what he was talking about. It wasn't just hyperbole. And people joke all the time now because we have a post-Cold War liberal order. But as you'll see, it's a fantasy. It's an illusion. And that's breaking down, right? So this last 30 years, we've been living through that. It's been breaking down because it was baked in. Despite all of our good organizing, up here, it's reflected like progressive peace movement, right? It gets a higher score because it's good. It doesn't always work, alter globalization here. But starting with the U.S. military-industrial complex down here, who is involved? Well, these people. Know your history, And like I said, it wasn't always about left, right, and where they land, because this is the thing. When you take the political spectrum seriously, people lose patience with this kind of stuff. But this is a kind of modern framework based on the history of the left and right terms, how they crystallize the stereotypes. It still has validity. It still has truth value. But of course, it's insufficient. My main critique, what I would say is insufficient of this, a lot of people don't get, is that it misses what's over here, right? There is an actual left-wing politics that's been suppressed throughout history. So it's hard to define. So that's one basic problem with this. And to the right of this is just fascism. But at any rate, we want to transcend that by having higher order understanding of politics, map it over more dimensions. And on a map like this isn't my score, but people will land in different places depending on what's being tested, right? And that often gets lost in the noise. I liked this one because this website, ideoshapes.com, I encourage everyone to give it a shot because it was the easiest questionnaire to get through and it produces the clearest results. Like, I think this is pretty good. Like on this side, I'm in the peace and progress quadrant, you know, where it's bright green and close enough here. And that's where I would want to be. Furthest matches Nazism, right? So I'm at the other end. But if we go over here to different types of communism mapped, I'm not a tanky, you know, I'm a meta communist up here in the top right, because this is the kind of tracking the lineage of ideas and experiments with these ideas. You know, the higher we go, the more speculative it is. But again, you know, I call people's attention to this kind of +1 sweet spot because that's where a lot of this stuff is blocked, right? Greens have no power. And socialists and communists in the United States have no power. Let's look at a map of political parties in the US. People complain about the two-party system all the time, but this is actually a more broader, accurate map of different parties that exist, right? So you have some far right MAGA parties, and Project 2025 would be over here. Here's the Republican Party, right? Solidly regressive. Libertarian Party, no labels. And then this big block here, independents, right? And there's, you know, here's a chart of independents, right? Showing they basically split down the middle anyways. But the point I'm making, the meta point, because I'm advocating for a sort of meta left and a post-political path, it's to understand that you need to convince these people that they have something in common and directionally, and that they can transform that into electoral power. The Democratic Party, right, is here. Not good enough. I mean, I've got so much data here that's generated. I want to kind of zoom in on different ways to draw the boundaries and assess the problem, right? I'm not saying there has to be a one right way to do it, but if you have the paradigm, it's going to produce reliable, consistent results. So these are factions, right? The hard left, as wide as it is, gets a bad rap for some -2 behavior or policies, let's say. Doesn't even touch the meta left. And, you know, these are amenable. These are drafts, but I think they're really informative. I'll get to how the scores are calculated. I mean, it's the scoring is not arbitrary, but the bounds are, you know, the number system and the starting points often originated from me. But I'm generally, you know, trusting the math that it's choosing. In some cases, it'll become more clear. Some of these graphs, like this one, is analysis of a YouTube video called How Leftists Can Win. So it's a demonstration of my scoring system taking the key arguments or themes from the video and kind of mapping where they score, give or take. But it just conceptually helps map out a wider potential frame for politics. Here, let me zoom in on this one for a minute because this is kind of more end game stuff, and we're at almost 2:30. This is a four futures kind of scenario, right? If we pursue integrated epistemics and emancipatory politics and policies, that's the ideal outcome. Those things converge. If you get a trade-off, we get the authoritarian version, technocratic plateau, elite driven, and over here, the neo-tribal, that's a different kind of elite dominance. There'll be a lot of epistemic fragmentation. And then the worst case scenario is the timeline we're already in, right? Trump 2.0, reactionary Ragnarok, or whatever you want to call these things, right? What does that have? Low coherence, low justice, authoritarian regimes, reactionary ideology getting even worse, dominated by the lower levels. Wherever people are coming from on the political spectrum, because I'll show you some examples of people moving as well. We should want to converge on the direction and policies that are going to mobilize change most effectively. This isn't about how it's scored. We'll get to that. But this just gives an example of if we're to talk about a particular problem, like let's highlight the democratic deficit. That's the gap between kind of our shared values and public opinion and then actually getting that stuff done. There's a huge gap, right? But it's centered around level -1 causing it. What we need is the exact thing that they block, structural justice. And, I'm just giving a tour of this. People would actually have to engage with the content itself to get it on a deeper level. But I'm trying to show how it can apply to, let's say, liminal political consciousness, to rattle people out of the slumber and disorientation of living in the center of this map. I mean, we all love stuff up here, right? This is the higher level stuff is what. So the CCWI. So I have up here, I mean, we can call this whatever we want, but I called it the Cognitive Culture War Index. And then here, just for some diversity, like I came up with some alternatives and they could be explored in different directions. But basically, the model I kept working with and called was this. And again, like I'm not trying to hide the fact that this tracks with like other stage models, but it's different. It's fundamentally different because it's measuring political and historical literacy and engagement. And we need to be able to demystify this stuff, right? Like, look at this and tell me if there's any confusion, who you think are the good guys and the bad guys. Okay, I mean, we can have nuanced arguments, but just for the purposes of clarity, this is mapping military industrial complex actors versus an emergent peace industrial complex civil society. And this is just how they score, It's not measuring right, left. This is kind of measuring the same thing. That's why it looks very similar, but it's called hypermodern drag versus metamodern attractors, right? We all agree, I hope, speculative futures, indigenous movements, global civil society, international socialism, green parties, the UN development agenda, Nordic countries. These are good things. Not perfect, but the right wing demonizes them all as some sort of elite globalist agenda, and they're projecting, a very hollow definition of what they attack, and that's the general pattern. And no more is that more clear than say something like this. Looking at the different definitions of wokeness, like depending on who you're talking to, what level do they identify with, right? I regularly have people on Integral Global tell me wokeness is Marxist brainwashing, or political correctness gone mad, or well-meaning but flawed. You'll notice the level 0 is mainstream DEI. It's not enough, but it's a minimum sort of stopgap. This type of analysis puts people behind this red line or even behind the center line in check and says, no, we're not going to let QAnon, MAGA conservatives, and a bunch of reactionaries to tell us what those words mean. So this map, again, I'm highlighting the middle zone here as the conflict zone. But you can see there's, there's many actors and they don't all measure up, but I put here quite a wide berth where game B, integral, metamodern, doesn't even go that high. I mean, sure, some of us project up here and think up here, but in terms of the impact, it's this kind of spectrum, right? And game B flirts with right-wing talking points. So that kind of spread is what it is. And then here's the Liberal Party, right? It falls within that. Here's the progressives. They kind of materially, are pushing for concrete change and being ignored. Radical indigenous and decolonial activists up here. And Tanner and I were just talking the other day about how, they lost the Standing Rock trial. And that was a long battle. And that goes back to, our 15-year window here. That was 2017. And that was horrific. And so, people who think that the left-right axis is irrelevant or it doesn't inform anything, I ask you, in in a time of hyperpolarization, when the categories of left and right and center have held a type of coherence for the past 70 years, when did that stop making sense for you? When did you check out, is another way to put it. Or if you're new to the left, that's great too. And so that's a good opportunity to go to back to this one, and then just come up here. Here's a map showing in the red here people who descended on the spectrum. Not every example is a great one, but Kanye West is a great example. Big descent. Candace Owens is on her way back the other way because she's done a 180 on Israel. So things like this matter. Over time, you do see people move, and it's important to understand these movements. The green lines are people who've ostensibly come from a conservative background and are making their way up. And I thought this was hilarious. Richard Spencer's on here. And I hate to admit it. I mean, he was one of the worst open Nazis out there. And he's been like another kooky figure, David Icke. I've seen them saying sensible things. So, you know, I could go on all day about that kind of thing, but this is what I want to draw attention to again for, you know, liminal type people is you should want to know who you are. Or where you are. It's not a judgment scale. It's not punching down. And of course, like, to use it that way would not only be improper, it would kind of break the whole system. You can also just pump social issues into the matrix to, you know, get it to outline who the different actors are in the healthcare debate. Like, you're one of those people on the fence. You think healthcare should be a little bit private and a little bit public. Brandon, you want me to zoom in on which list of people?
Well, you've got a lot of people who we know, you know, in that list there.
The big one?
You barely showed it there.
I know. I will. I'll move on to that. You're not going to be able to really see them in that list anyways. It's formatted bad. But so this is just healthcare in a nutshell. You know, I think single payer is the best, and that's up here. I wanted to zoom in here too. I made a little graph just on the transgender topic, right? Like, where is the scientific validity in the debate? Well, it's generally with scientists and education organizations and trans people themselves. Where is all the aversion and suppression and malice? It's right where you'd expect it to be, on the right wing. And there are exceptions to that rule, of course, for various reasons. But again, what I'm showing is that in terms of political progress, and you want to know why we're not progressing, it's because we live in this distorted reality tunnel because these people are overpaid and undereducated and yet somehow lead the public discourse. Why are we allowing this? Or, you know, why are we so powerless? You know, we're less strength in numbers. That does bring us into a focus on various specific actors in liminal space. That's what this is. But I've actually redacted everybody's names for obvious reasons. I don't think people are ready for that. But what this chart shows, sorry, I'm moving around a lot. This is what I call the fliminal web down here. People who have got stuck at this transition point, this interstitial. They denied it, or they wanted to ignore it and go around it. They say, oh, that's not the way. And granted, there's always going to be problems and challenges with a Bernie Sanders or a Jeremy Corbyn or a left-wing party in general. But again, you have to understand why. It's not because leftists are weak intellectually or morally, or, you know, can't govern or can't meme or whatever the claim may be. It's because they've been systematically suppressed for our entire lives. And you got to stop pretending that's not the case. So anyways, it's 2:40. I could keep going. What's valuable that I haven't really covered? Down here, this is other liminal people that this is just how they got scored. I mean, it's a little bit me giving some tweaks, but it's generally, it's a relative scale, right? And what I'm arguing for is working together more openness. So Maggie, I came up with the term fliminal quite a while ago, like 2 years ago, and just sort of as an extension of prior critiques I've had, but basically like flim-flam, flimsiness are the kind of term I'm capitalizing on here, just turning liminal into fliminal, because there's a fundamental blind spot around politics, right? And again, I'm not trying to disparage anybody or start fights. I'm trying to show what the data shows and where I think the opportunity is. So I see these thresholds as opportunity zones. And to get through them, it requires a group effort, right? That's one thing. Here's another thing. Here's a game theoretical matrix of how things are going to turn out if people are more inclined to fully cooperate or partially defect or completely defect and go into group denial. Unfortunately, the past pattern has been group denial, but at any rate, it is what it is. You want to know why we're stuck in this group and in the world at large? It's because politics is really, really complex. It's really, really manipulated, and want to map these big things in a valid way to help people move up and down. So I'll stop it there because I really want to talk to you guys, and we only have 15 minutes like in the time allotted, but also in the call itself. Like I think this meet is just going to expire and kick us all out. But I do want to keep going. This is Frame VR, if you guys can see that. Okay, so this is my 3D networking space. And I've imported objects. There's lots of zones we can walk around and talk. And I'll explain more if people want to meet me in there. Does anybody want to just speak up? I mean, I'll look at the comments I missed as well, but I want to take some engagement, comments, and questions. Go ahead, Brandon.
Yeah, I'm interested in how the scale works and what methodology you use to score people and organizations and I guess ideas and a lot of other things. I mean, what you're doing here is pretty impressive. I'm just
cool. Thanks. Yeah, I do want to explain it. I don't want to be opaque at all. Let me just find if I can find where I even had because there was many answers to that question. The basic question is this project does stem from focusing on that IDW as a case study because, I mean, it was diverse and homogenous at the same time, you know, and it was just a very like on the nose case study for the new right and political reaction. So wanting to understand where they were in a kind of taxonomy of levels of cultural literacy, right? Like, so I do actually, let me see where I can find it. There's a score just for Jordan Peterson. I think this is it. How to score. So, okay, here we go. So this is just one of the answers to Brandon's question because there are different ones and you get different scores. Cognition, 2. Some may even argue 3. I wouldn't, but you can see in the other categories, politics, culture, affiliations, integrity, it brings his weighted score down. And frankly, you know, you'll see on some of my other candlestick charts, like there's a low end and a high end for these people. We could say Jordan Peterson's high end is -2 on a good day. You know, I'm fine with that. But his low end, right, where he's making tens of millions of dollars from, where the level of some of his angry or more deranged talking points would be measured on, because we can do that. With this sort of system, you can analyze social media conversations, YouTube videos. You can just ask it general questions from the ether, like I did, like, hey, put the Cold War through the system, you know, and it does so. So that's one way, you know, some of these figures get a really low score. When if Jordan Peterson was an ally, again, not a partisan, but an ally for justice, it'd be a very different story. Yeah. So I hope that's sufficient for answering your questions, like there, Brandon. Just as a placeholder for that, because there's other ways to answer that question. Anybody else?
I saw some overlap with the Pew Research Center political types in one of your black background boxes that had about epistemological groups. And
Uh,
I'd be interested in discussing that.
yeah. You said it was one of the black ones?
Yeah, and it had epistemological something groups in the title. Anyway, I'll pop my email into the chat if you like to.
Sure.
Time.
Yeah, sorry, I forget where that Pew
No worries.
stuff was,
No
but
worries.
yeah, one of these, I have way more of these too. They didn't even make it into the presentation, but yeah, polling's a funny thing, right? Because just in the same way, like each different diagram, I'm showing you different things. Polling can be all over the place, and the presentation can be manipulated. I'm also trying to show how it's possible and necessary. Let me zoom in on this one. Like all of the recalcitrant, resistant institutions, that are in the negative zone here, a lot of them still need to be like worked with. We don't have a choice, but what has to be different is who, like imagine a world, if you will, when the Hillary Clintons and Joe Bidens and Kamalas and Obama who lost to Trump and are pearl clutching and hand wringing instead of just talking to the left still, we could be on a different historical trajectory. I don't want us all to just be doomers perpetually, especially in this window 2025 to 2030, with the second Trump term and AI and AGI coming on board. Like, don't be silly, right? It's going to be more I told you so, because these elections are close, every time, and there's just so much political apathy and it tilts towards the right and Trumpism. So yeah, some of this data does reflect, polls and research and where people are at. Who else has a question?
I don't have a question as much of a comment of you showed me this table before you presented it, and I thought it was really interesting just because it matched my political cognition journey, like almost exactly. I was like, oh, I remember when I was like -3 libertarian in college. And then I remember going out into the world and falling into kind of liberal technocraticism and not paying attention as closely. And then for the last 5 years, I've just been obsessed, focused on political theory, political philosophy, and it's like, oh, I can see these stages actually as I learned more.
Yeah, and we talked about that, and I have a similar journey in a sense, like less kind of dramatic, but I've been re-radicalized, towards the left, time and time again. But yeah, to Tanner's point, and then we'll go to Maggie quickly. It's like, it doesn't matter where you are right now. You can begin your journey at any age. It's hard. Being a leftist or whatever is hard, and we don't even want to do that anymore. We want to go beyond it. And from a meta perspective, I don't think people can ignore the patterns that kind of not just suggest, but compel us to build coherence and converge around more positive levels of political intelligence and policy that like are proven or are so good, the deep state wants to quash them and wants to historically assassinate people and wants to currently round them up and deport them. And a lot of the bad stuff that happens is also distraction for worse stuff, I hate to say. Go ahead, Maggie.
Thank you so much, Brent. This was really incredible framework and analysis, really appreciating. I guess I'm just wondering, and I suspect, it depends on your positionality and what like context you're in, but do you have a sense of what the theory of change is for the liminal web? At least in the game B world, it kind of feels like this amorphous, like we're going to take one step and it's a complex, chaotic system and we've never seen this before. So we're going to sense and then act. And it's very emergent, which I appreciate. But I'm curious if you have a bit more of a clear, maybe not necessarily like linear theory of change, but unfolding that you see in terms of how this particular community can evolve to these levels that you're alluding to.
Yeah, I do. Thanks. Yeah, first, I'll say, I know what their theories of change are. A lot of these groups have abstract models that are easy to sign on to in theory. It's like a lot of it is very abstract. Multi-level perspective is one. It's like, oh, a bunch of stuff is happening. Oh, and then there's a bunch of stuff happening, and then it all turns into a movement. It's really just like that. And I'm just trying to put content in those kinds of things, and so people can't avoid the content complexity. We can swim around in abstract models all day. So one short answer is putting this into those models, grappling with the reality of it. Another is up here, I am literally trying to provide and shepherd a way out of the fliminality. It does depend so much, almost entirely, on you random people, on people I know, like Brandon, who is, let's call him somewhere in the yellow band. It's a very strategic place to be. And Tanner, and again, I don't even want to be directly involved with a lot of this process. I just need to know it's being followed faithfully to solve these problems. Because people have their reasons not to trust me, and that's fine. But I don't think you can ignore what the different interests. Oh, sorry, I'm referring to my map, and I'm not showing it now. I'd love to keep talking. I think this is just going to kick us out any minute here, so I apologize if that happens. But yeah, I think to answer Maggie's question further, and there you have it, folks. That is where the call was cut off. I wish I planned it differently and could continue that. Maggie's question was great, and I'd like to follow up on that more. I've got a little treat for you, just a clip of something I'm working on, counted as a little sneak preview, and there's more of this if you join. Still have very low sort of membership, kind of like a dozen to 24 people at any given time over the years, and never quite enough for an ongoing working group. So let's get it to that level. I mean, regardless of the donations and funding, because you can join for as little as $1. I'd like to hit 100 patrons as soon as possible. That would make this work more operational and feel more meaningful and impactful. So let's start converging here so you can have more of this kind of work if you want it. If nobody wants it, nobody gets it. That's the funny thing about change, I guess. I believe that it's a article of faith, it's a spiritual journey, and it's a historical one. So the more I learn, the more faith I have, coincidentally, that these things are possible. I mean, we already should agree that they're necessary, and I think it's inevitable anyways, but the question is how and when. And we're in a constant crisis. Not everyone even feels it, but most people do. So the more salient it becomes, the more we can deconstruct the fake threats, the more we can build solidarity and collective action. And trust me, when it comes to politics, we will start catching lucky breaks. But there needs to be a post-political coalition that will inevitably draw most of its people from the existing political left and liberal, a little bit from the liberal center movements and institutional support. So I believe that begins right now.
Here in the studio, we're ready to roll. Reporting the stories, the truth will unfold. From politics to pop culture, we give you the scoop. In satirical fashion, we're poking fun at the group. Epic till cycles of power and disbelief. We weave the narratives with a touch of relief. From scandals to sensations, the news never ends. Our fusion of genres, we hope it transcends. Breaking news now, lights, camera, action.